Well, hello everyone. This is Data-Driven Formula One. I think this is the first episode after Christmas. So Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Ganna. Merry Christmas to all if you're celebrating.
Yes, and and happy holiday season. I guess everyone has some sort of a holiday during winter, so hopefully you're celebrating something between Christmas and New Year. And today we're talking about Jim Clark.
Even after.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And we have a lot of holidays coming up in different parts of the world. So whatever you are celebrating, congratulations. And we're hoping that you have great holidays. I forgot to introduce us, Patrick, Henz, Ganna, Pogrebna, as usual.
Hello.
And today we're talking about Jim Clark.
Exactly, Ganna. And Jim Clark is traditionally one of the pilots which is always mentioned somewhere in the top 5 or top 10 of the world's best Formula One drivers. So an interesting character and very talented.
Yeah, so very cool career, and actually, I just just in preparation for this episode, I found some headlines or papers that kind of came out when Jim Clark died. So we're gonna talk about this today, and some of these headlines said they called him Lucky Jim. I actually never saw that in any of the articles, but apparently they called him Lucky Jim. So that was his nickname. But today we're going to talk about his life and career. And actually, when I think about Jim Clark, I kind of remember the I think it's not I don't remember the year of this film, but I remember Skyfall. So the James Bond film, because Jim Clark spent the majority of his early years in Scotland, and much like so if you watch Skyfall, it's kind of this like big stately home. Of course, Jim Clark didn't have that big of a home, but I think his teen years were probably similar in terms of spending childhood in Scotland.
Exactly, as you mentioned, he was from Scotland, from a place called Kilmarnock in Fife, and there he was born on March 4, 1936. And unfortunately, as you may see, he died much too young and with 32 years. So you can already assume it. He died also in a race accident. But this is something we will come back later. He participated in 73 Formula One races with 25 victories, which has a fantastic ratio. And this is something which these numbers will come back later, also comparing them to Alain Prost or Ayrton Senna. And with this, he won 2 championships and once the Indianapolis 500.
Yeah, and he was basically a star. We can say he was a star driver for Lotus.
Yes, you can say that.
Yeah, and in fact, since the first time he was, I think he got his initial job by competing with Colin Chapman at the Boxing Day on 1958, and so since the time when he actually got his first job, he was the driver for Lotus. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And as we were especially also underlined in our special episode about Colin Chapman, Lotus was practically one a team which focused on one driver.
Yes, exactly.
And
Yes, that's right. So yeah.
And in many cases, this was Jim Clark, and Jim Clark also, I mean, is practically related to Lotus only if you remember him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
So he started.
yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
So he was son of a farmer's family in Scotland. And this is, let's say, where he felt home, um, and practically all his life he stayed connected with this mindset, being a farmer, because this is practically how he perceived himself, even before perceiving himself as a driver. So if you visit today his grave, you see him as a farmer's boy, and including a quote, and not as the famous Formula One hero.
Yeah, he was also like, if we talk about his early childhood, he was the youngest child of 5, I believe, and yeah, so he basically, yeah, he I guess had quite a few siblings, and as far as I know, his parents did not support him in his desire to drive. But as soon as he started driving, he started driving competitively as well. And yeah, so he actually had, I'm just trying to find the first car. Yeah, Talbot, that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, Sunbeam Talbot. And with the Sunbeam Talbot, he entered a few competitions, right? But yeah, it's important to say that his family actually initially did not support his desire to drive, unlike I think many other drivers that we saw that we saw on this in this series, where normally you have a lot of family support and people are trying to kind of help you pursue your dreams. So this was the opposite, I think, story.
Exactly, and in opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And in opposite to many other drivers, but also team principals, he not grew up in the parents' workshop, or he not grew up on a gas station. So really, he came from a complete different environment as a lot of other drivers of this time.
Yeah, but nevertheless, if you've ever been to Scotland, I really love Scotland, and just want to say hello to all the Scottish friends. You would know that that's kind of a great place to drive, and I think he probably had quite a lot of opportunities to drive, or even though obviously. Like we said before, there probably was a disadvantage compared to some English younger drivers, but he had his dream, and he wanted to drive competitively, and he did that. And actually, like I said before, in 1928 on Boxing Day, there was a race. He raced Colin Chapman on basically on Lotus, and he won. And that got him a job in Lotus. So yeah.
Just to mention for the ones not living in UK, Boxing Day is the 25th of
26,
December. So
26. Yeah, 26.
26.
Yeah, 25th is the Christmas day. 26. I think this is celebrated in the UK and in Canada as well. And this is when you
Commonwealth.
Yeah, so this is I'm not sure about Commonwealth, but definitely in England. And this is when you normally see your extended family. And traditionally, there are many races and many sporting events on Boxing Day, because it is a day off. So you get a day off. But this normally is used by many different by many different organizations to kind of organize some sort of races. For example, my ex-husband was competing in cycling competitions on a bicycle, right? And there is one really kind of famous cycle ride on Boxing Day near Kenilworth in Warwickshire. So this is like very famous, and sometimes it's very cold and freezing, and it's kind of it is raining and freezing at the same time, which is very often what we have in the UK. And people are still riding bicycles, on this day. So, Boxing, I just want to say, like, Boxing Day traditionally is used for kind of various sporting events, and at the time it was used for obviously for a car race, and it was basically Brands Hatch where they competed, and he won. He basically very impressed Colin Chapman, and since that time he became the driver for Lotus.
Exactly. So practically since '58 he was driving these English Lotus cars, starting from Formula Junior up to Formula One.
Exactly. So we need to mention this, that he was initially driving Formula Junior. I think we didn't talk about Formula Junior yet, but so he got initially a seat in Formula Junior with Lotus, and then eventually he actually got a seat in 1960, right, if I'm not mistaken, in on the Formula One team. And so exactly that. And then Dutch, so he actually participated in this Dutch Grand Prix. This was his first drive in Formula One.
Exactly. So he also had a little bit of luck, as normally it was planned that John Surtees should have this seat in the 1960 Lotus, but as he preferred continuing with his motorcycle career, Jim Clark used the opportunity and shine since his debut.
Yes, absolutely. And if we think about Lotus, so we discuss Lotus a lot in our kind of series where we do annual reviews of Formula One competition, and there we talk a lot about Lotus team. So definitely Lotus was one of the places to be, and it was a very, very strong team, especially kind of in 1960s, 1970s. It was basically his kind of lucky ticket that he drew on that Boxing Day. And eventually, in 1960, when he got a seat, although, like we said with Patrick before, when we have a special episode about Colin Chapman, so please have a look if you haven't seen it, or listen to it on the podcast. And we said that, even though Chapman was a great innovator, he had, if not disregard, but he had very special relationship with safety, I'd say. So it was, even though it was probably the fastest, the most innovative team at the time, it was also probably the most dangerous seat in town, because, effectively, Colin Chapman's idea was to build lighter cars, which of course were a lot faster, but often this came at an expense of safety.
And you see it's quite good on the photo here, where we have the Lotus in comparison to the Ferrari 156. You see the Lotus is the much lighter, the much smaller car. I never had the opportunity to see the Lotus in person, but I saw the Ferrari. So even these Ferraris are very thin car, very light car, but in comparison to the Lotus, on the photos, it looks like practically like a heavy tank or something like this.
Yes, exactly. I mean, yeah, so I obviously saw Lotuses living in England for many years, but we again, like we discussed in the episode with Colin Chapman. So Colin Chapman is one of the inventors of this idea of kind of eggshell, right? So when you effectively have a structure that is very light, but at the same time, should anything happen anywhere, the whole structure will fall apart, right? So it is a very fragile construction if you think about it, but it is very fast. Whereas I think Ferrari's strength is of course the engine, and you would you would rely a lot on a very strong engine, and that was not the idea of the Lotus car. So even though Lotus cars were, of course, from the engineering perspective, were really good as well, but they were not built for kind of strong engines, right? So they were built
exactly.
more for aerodynamics and overall sort of lightness and speed.
Yeah, and Lotus, I mean, they never used an own engine and never deployed it, but they started, if I'm correct, with the Climax, and then also they had BRM. While in opposite Ferrari, they did practically an engine, and then they tried to build a car around the engine.
Right? Yeah, Ford.
At the end, they had Ford.
Yeah, so and even if you go now to Jim Clark's birthplace in Kilmany, you actually see the statue of Jim Clark, and actually at the bottom of it says Ford. So I mean, it is. So what I mean is, yeah, it was basically, at the time, this was the main collaboration between Lotus and Ford. Of course, it changed over the years, but Patrick and I are currently discussing the end of 1960s, and this is when it was Lotus Ford collaboration. And yes, indeed, so they relied on other companies with engines, indeed, but I mean they made pretty good choices. So we discussed Ford, well, in passing, Ford Ferrari rivalry at Le Mans, and this was exactly the years when Ford managed to win over Ferrari. I mean, I know that was just like a lot of people consider that a lucky win, but nevertheless, I mean, this was probably the time when Ford was most competitive in these in these competitions, and well, at least over Ferrari. And so Ford was also one of the companies that contributed to the development of engines. Lotus.
Yes, and on the other hand, Lotus supported Ford, as Lotus was the team with which Ford entered Formula One, and they had been like their test team, so they helped developing the engine. It was less Jim Clark, but Graham Hill, who was the test driver developing the Ford engine. But nevertheless, Clark managed the first victory with a Ford-engined Lotus.
Yes, exactly, and so and we will come to this, but after Jim Clark's death, actually Graham Hill managed to actually hold this whole team together because Colin Chapman, I think. Jim Clark was definitely his favorite driver, and the whole team was really devastated by the loss, and they pulled their act very quickly together after Jim Clark's death. Primarily because they had Graham Hill. So
I think Graham Hill at that time wasn't planned to be the number one driver, but he was
He had to.
had a lot of
He had to do
experience.
it, right? He had to do it.
Yeah, but luckily he had all the experience. He was practically in an age where others already retired. So he won Formula One, he won Monaco, Indianapolis, Le Mans. So he had all the experience. I mean, he saw people dying around him in motorsports. So he was like the center stone, as you said, and he could really help bringing Lotus out of this emotional crisis.
Right, that's right. So, yeah, I mean, we have a special episode about Graham Hill, so please have a look. We discuss his career there in great detail, but yes, I mean, it's good. In that sense, Lotus team was very lucky that they also had Graham Hill and Jim Clark at the same time. So, yeah.
Yep. Okay, but let's go back to time to his first championship. He won in 1963, and here he won 7 out of 10 races. And with this, not only became the drivers' champion, but also supported that Lotus could win the constructors' world championship. And I think up to today, this is an unbroken record. There had been drivers with more victories in the season, but over the time up to today, Formula One reason includes much more races than in '63. So honestly, I don't know how much races we have, but nearly double. So winning 7 out of 10 is a record which still holds up to today.
Yeah, I think that now we have about 15. I can double check. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah. So this is definitely a record. And with Patrick, when we discussed 1963, you can find the episode. It was like we looked at the table at the beginning. It was like, oh, this was a rather boring season because
Right.
no intrigue at all. But I mean, no disrespect to Jim Clark, of course. I mean, very talented driver, and of course, the Lotus team was really. Really behind it as well. So yeah, because Formula One is a team sport, it's not really one-man show. So in that sense, we just have to always remember that it's not just one guy, but it's a team effort with many people working towards the result.
Exactly, and with this, and you have here the numbers on our slide. He had a success rate of 70% in the season. So even if Prost and Senna had more race victories in the same year, the Prost record from 1988 was winning 43.75%, and also Senna only won half of the races. So this really shows Jim Clark's talent, and that's why what we mentioned at the beginning. If you ask people what have been the best drivers of all time, you find Jim Clark always in the top 5 or at least the top 10.
Yeah, I just looked up. So in 2020, we had 17 races, 17 Grand Prix. Just going to quickly check. Yeah, we had 21 in 2019, which was obviously more of a standard season compared to COVID affected one. But yeah, I mean, generally we have something between 15 and 21 or so races. And previously we had 10, maybe 12. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, Indianapolis 500. So that's so that was quite a tough. If you remember our earlier episodes in the series, we discussed that was quite a tough ground for European drivers to win generally, because the track in Indianapolis obviously is kind of in straight lines, and we discussed that Alberto Ascari kind of attempted a race there, but then he wasn't very successful, so in 1960s we saw quite a few European drivers go to the States, and equally American drivers come to Europe. And finally, we saw some wins from European drivers, and Jim Clark was one of them, right?
Yeah, and not only the driver, he also drove the Lotus to victory.
Yes,
which not only showed Jim Clark's talent, but also underlined Lotus' philosophy to build a car which is have been less powerful than the US ones, but much lighter. So he also brought the Lotus philosophy to victory in the Indianapolis 500, and not only in Formula One.
Yes, exactly. So in 1965, again, if you remember our previous episode about 1965, again, quite a boring year again, in the sense that again it was Lotus and Jim Clark domination in the standings. But this was a very important year for Lotus, because not only Jim Clark won the championship, but also they won Indianapolis 500 the same year. So it was kind of double success for Lotus and Jim Clark that year.
Yes, and another record for Jim Clark standing up to today, because he's the only driver so far who won Indianapolis 500 and the Formula One season in the same year. There had been various drivers, and you see their names here: Graham Hill, Mario Andretti, Emerson Fittipaldi, and Jacques Villeneuve, who won both, but never in the same year.
Yes, that's right. Yes. We have to, when we talk about, Jim Clark's career, so Jim Clark obviously was very, he was the key person for Lotus. And so when he died, as Patrick mentioned, it was a huge shock for the team. But we have to make a special note here that Jim Clark didn't lose his life in Formula One event. He was actually driving Formula 2. He was effectively in a Formula 2 event when he died.
Yes.
Right, and it was in Hockenheim Ring in West Germany when this tragic accident occurred. And like I said, I just in preparation to this episode, I looked up some newspapers, and they all discuss Jim Clark's career from his childhood, and he had basically really horrific accident, and effectively broken his neck, and had skull fractures and all these like injuries that it was absolutely it was highly improbable that he would survive. And like I said, that was a huge shock to the entire team, and to the entire fan community of Formula One.
Yeah, and I guess most people in England had been Jim Clark fans. I mean, he won 2 championships, and I mean, he won the first race of the 96 season, so he was the #1 driver in comparison to Graham Hill. So, I mean, he was practically set to win the 96 championship again.
I just also want to say here that we had, I think, a comment to to one of our episodes when we're talking about people in Formula One, so that we are smiling too much. Someone said that, oh, you are making you're talking about people dying and you kind of smile at the same time. So I just want to say that in every episode that we do about Formula One drivers, especially this early episodes, a lot of these fantastic drivers and people who worked in Formula One, so the majority of them died some sort of tragic death because the safety standards were not great. But if we smile, it doesn't mean that we laugh at something. So we just we're just trying to remember the legacy of this person, and it's important that it's not all gloom and doom, because otherwise each episode will be really, really gloomy. So we of course recognize the talent of the person that is involved, but at the same time we're trying to remember the legacy and remember what contribution this person made, and that is the silver lining there. If there is, if we can find the silver lining in a tragic event like this, so it's important to not just say, oh, it's all horrible because this fantastic person lost his life, but it's also about understanding the contribution and appreciating the contribution of this person to the sport.
Yeah, and I think we discussed in one of our last episode, we just had now in 2020 this very heavy fire accident by Romain Grosjean. And a lot of drivers, including Lewis Hamilton, Sebastian Vettel, mentioned it was unhuman, as many TV stations repeatedly showed the accident and all the big fire. And I think this is something what we try to avoid. I mean, we not include here many photos of the fatal accidents.
Yeah,
so we
exactly.
Celebrate the legacy, the life, and not want to present here the spectacular photos or videos, which of course you all can find on the internet. You can go to YouTube. You find this videos of a lot of fatal accidents, and this is something what we not like to include so much in our videos here.
Yes, exactly, and also, I think so. Yeah, it's not it's not the point to sort of say, oh, this was a tragic death, but what we are trying to do here is trying to understand what mark this person made on the sport. And very often we discuss how a particular incident actually had an impact on the sport and the safety regulations. So that's the most important thing, So of course, everybody dies. I mean, some die earlier than later, and it is a tragedy. And it's really horrible to lose such a talented person as, for example, Jim Clark so early in life. But at the same time, if we look at his career, he in 32 years he achieved something that most people do not achieve through the entire life. He was a two-time world champion in Formula One, and we're trying to celebrate his life rather than kind of say, oh, let's cry now because he lost his life. I mean, so just I just want to make a point that it's not that we don't care. Of course we do, and like Patrick said, it's not our goal to show you the horrible accidents here, but rather to actually understand what was the contribution of this person and what was their achievement, what did they achieve by their career, by their life, and how this changed the sport. That's what we want to understand here.
Yeah. And going back to this particular event in Germany, You are right. He was not driving Formula One, but Formula Two Lotus. It's in '68. It was a little bit different than it is today, because today we have Formula Two again, but it's like a junior Formula. It's a stepstone before going to Formula One. Of course, it was also in the '60s that way, but Formula 2 still had a higher value. So a lot of the famous Formula 1 drivers used the opportunity to race also Formula 2, for example, in the Hockenheimring, as in this example, especially in this case, because Lotus had contractual obligations to represent Firestone in this race. So in opposite today, we see Formula 1 drivers much more driving outside F1, like in Formula 2, like in the Tasman series in New Zealand, Australia, in the winter time. Also they had more time to go to Le Mans or other adventures. So it was not strange to see that somebody like Jim Clark used the opportunity to drive a Formula 2 car in a race.
Yes, absolutely. And we saw, many Formula One drivers compete also in, motorcycling and, Patrick said, endurance races. So yeah, I mean, this was quite a common practice. To be honest, I mean, this type of accident could have happened also in Formula One. It wasn't very safe at the time.
No, I mean, the cars had been practically the same, just a little bit smaller engine.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, the fact is a fact. This was a very young, very talented driver, lost his life. Two-time world champion again. And like we said before, this was a huge shock for the whole team. And only because, they had Graham Hill, who kind of took over, they were able to bounce back that season. Yeah,
exactly. And another thing which we saw also in other deadly accidents before, I think the organizers learned from this because today you do not see any kind of trees near the racetrack.
Yeah.
As at the Hockenheimring at that time.
Yes, exactly. So when we discuss these types of incidents, so we always say, we always see that there were some consequences of the accident. And so in earlier years, especially, we had quite a lot of incidents when it was not only the driver or not, not just a few drivers that were injured in some of the, or even lost their lives in some of the incidents, but also the audience. And with Patrick, we discussed in great detail how the organizers actually adapted the circuits to make sure that people cannot kind of just come very close to the circuit. So all of these things actually one of the great things about Formula One is that there are always conclusions being made, even from the events that didn't actually happen at Formula One. So sometimes the event would happen at Le Mans, and then would have security consequences for Formula One. So that's quite important. Yeah, another thing that we have to say here is that despite this tragic death, actually 1968 season was won by Lotus Ford, and Graham Hill became a champion. So that also kind of tells you that they were able to very quickly get their act together, and even in the same season achieve the championship win. So it probably was would have been a win for For Jim Clark, if he continued, I mean, we can of course only speculate, but considering, the state of the car, so even despite this tragic event, they were able to achieve the championship win. So that tells you that if, things were going as planned, perhaps they would be able to achieve this, the championship win even faster, right? Because effectively
Exactly.
they lost the key driver at the beginning of the season.
Exactly. If you say that he was faster at that year than Graham Hill in average, if the team would have focused on him as the number one driver, I mean, he should have won the championship that year again.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so this is sort of the timeline of what the makes that Jim Clark was driving, and he basically started with this Lotus Climax 18, and you should see the previous, if you haven't seen the previous episodes where we discuss championship years, please have a look. So I think we've done now up to 1967, but definitely by the time this goes out, we'll also have 1968 and other years. And yeah, so we actually show all the makes in those episodes, and you can see the progress of Lotus from Lotus Climax 18 to Lotus Cosworth in 49. And yeah, definitely really cool makes, this really arrow-shaped car. Really beautiful. And yeah, so I think he drove probably in the golden era of Lotus, right? If we can say that. Because it was very experimental, very cool team, very fresh, and all these fresh ideas were almost immediately implemented, but as we can see, at a cost of safety very often.
And we shortly mentioned it. He also won twice the Tasman Series in Australia and New Zealand, where drivers but also teams used the opportunity to go there in wintertime to
It's
get
summertime
practice.
it's summertime in Australia.
Exactly, but if you're leaving in wintertime and arriving in summer.
Absolutely, yes. But
Yeah.
what I mean is, it's really weird because in Australia everything is the other way around, and in New Zealand everything is the other way around. So when it's, for example, currently everyone has winter holidays here. They call it summer holidays. So when you say so I sometimes say, so I'm currently in Sydney, and when I say to people like, have a great winter holidays, I say it's not winter, it's summer holidays. I'm like, yeah, sure. so it's very, it's a big change for me, for example, because people like Christmas is actually in summer, and New Year is actually in summer as well. So which is cool in a way, but at the same time very difficult to switch if you're if you've lived in in countries where the reverse is true. Yeah.
And another thing which we maybe also can investigate in another episode a little bit more in detail. In the 1960s, drivers as Jim Clark, they have been stars. I'm sure they had been relatively rich, but they not had been such earning such salaries as today in 2020. So this was also a good opportunity for all drivers to earn some extra money.
Yes, of course, and I mean this has to do with primarily to do with the sponsorships, right? So a lot of profits come from advertisement, and as I'm sure you all know, Formula One drivers do a fair amount of commercials for different brands that actually constitutes a lion's share of their income. And back in the day, we didn't have unlimited sponsorships in Formula One. Actually, in 1968, this is the year when Jim Clark died. This was the year when finally, unlimited sponsorship was allowed. And so starting from 1968, we actually saw the increase in advertisement in Formula One, and that's when many companies started to use these opportunities. So the kind of this dependency on kind of earning income elsewhere probably was decreased in later years, primarily due to the fact that there was sponsorship and commercial and advertising opportunities for drivers from that point on.
Yeah. Then let's see some of the words from the man himself. I have a policy that I get to spend as much on myself as I give away. I mean, you're of course on the first level. This is how you should calculate your spendings, but of course also you can see this on an emotional level. That you really have to take care of yourself. So you can interpret it, let's say, on the two levels from my point of view.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's even more kind of not from kind of non-monetary. What he's talking about here is not obviously not just money, but if you look at the pictures from Lotus team, you can actually always see a photo of Jim Clark, maybe Colin Chapman, maybe some mechanic, or just Jim Clark and someone from mechanical team or engineering team working on the car. And this is kind of also shows you the team spirit and how you need. I think it also has to do with this sort of analytics of Lotus, that you kind of share information, but you also, as a driver, you make your own conclusions from the race, but then you're also sharing just as much with the rest of the team, trying to get the car better. So I think that also has to do with that.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's even more acute today, as let's say most teams expect from their drivers that they do designing hours, that they are active on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, whatever. So it's today it became also a part of the job to give away, let's say, time, privacy. And so it's understandable that sometimes the drivers also want to have some time for their own use. You see sometimes that's the reason a lot of the VIPs using dark sunglasses, or also that some very few drivers still today try to stay away from social media. And I mean, the big example here is Sebastian Vettel, who is not on any kind of social media, but prefers to have some time just for himself and his family, and don't give away too much from himself. So I think this quote here by Jim Clark is really, it was relevant in the 60s and maybe even more relevant to today.
Yeah, that's right. I really like the second quote by Ayrton Senna. Yeah, and I think this is true for many people in the UK. I mean, it's interesting why Ayrton Senna had Jim Clark as his hero, but yeah, definitely a lot of people in the UK remember Jim Clark, and also I think Jim Clark is a very special person for Scotland, because Scotland produced some fantastic drivers and bike riders and generally athletes. So I think he's also a very important person to every person in Scotland who normally try to differentiate, Scottish from English and the rest. So I think, this is definitely true for not only for Ayrton Senna, but for many people in Scotland. So I mean, definitely it's cool that Jim Clark was an inspiration to Ayrton Senna. I can't wait when we're going to discuss Ayrton Senna as well. So another, absolutely fantastic driver that also lost his life very, very early.
Yeah. Behavior, I think most of this point we already discussed.
Yeah, again, we discussed that, but I guess, it's important to say that, I think in terms of character, I think he was quite unlikely, unlikely, unlikely person who would become a driver. Nothing, and he didn't have probably as many opportunities as other people that we have discussed to start on the sport, but he did it. He did it despite the fact that he didn't have support from his family. So he, I guess in terms of notable win, I would take the whole 1963 season. I know 1965 was cool because of Indianapolis, but to me it's still 1963. Because again, because of the table, the championship table, where basically against every race we had Jim Clark's name. With accident, obviously we have to go with his death. That's the most significant accident that he had. And this racing strategy, that's exactly what I wanted to discuss here, that he was really a very good, the reason why Lotus was so successful was that Jim Clark was really a great communicator of, what the car needed. And in fact, so was Graham Hill. So and I think this combination of having Jim Clark as the main driver and Graham Hill as a test driver for Lotus actually allowed them to achieve these fantastic results in 1960s, 1970s. Well, unfortunately, eventually it became so, like, in a sense, this idea of making cars lighter became so absurd, and it became really, really dangerous. And at that time, basically, Colin Chapman, I think, just stopped listening to the drivers who were telling him that, this car is becoming really unsafe. But in 1960s, it still was, I think, a very cool a collaboration between the driving team, the mechanical team, and engineering team, and obviously Colin Chapman's great innovative ideas made this team really thrive through 1960s and especially kind of mid and late 1960s if we look at it.
Yeah. It's less a strategy, but he really had a natural talent. He has been fast on complete different cars. He dominated Formula One. He won the Tasman Series. He won Indianapolis. He was even if he was not as much involved into the testing of the Ford engine. He could beat Graham Hill, who was the Ford test driver, even if he hadn't had the experience. So he was really a natural talent, and he was able to learn fast and bring the car to the maximum.
Absolutely.
And let's speak a little bit about the legacy. And We have, if you want to learn more about Jim Clark, as it's true for most drivers, there is some kind of trust foundation to let their legacy be alive. And in this case, we have the Jim Clark Trust, which mostly organizes and the museum, which you can find in Scotland, not surprisingly, not in his hometown, but in Berkshire. So there you find the Jim Clark Motor Museum. You have a cafe, a bistro, trails, and all kind of events to promote his heritage.
Yeah. So also as usual, when we do these episodes, Patrick and I basically always say that please read beyond what we tell you. I mean, I just want to say that even though this trust is not based in Fife, it is still in his birth country, so it is in Duns, Beckwithshire, where he actually was born near there. I mean, it's not right at the place where he was born, but it is very near to where he was born. And generally, I mean, if you have a chance to visit Scotland, when you can, I know there are obvious reasons now why we all cannot travel, but we have vaccine, which hopefully we will have, in full deployment by maybe September 2021. So when you get a chance to visit Scotland, it's a fantastic place. And if you need an excuse, Patrick just gave you an excuse of going and having a look at, Jim Clark's birthplace. And, this is definitely very, very good. Area, just area to visit. And if you are interested in what, in generally in motorsport, there are many places in the UK. Perhaps we can have a separate episode about that, where we will tell you. I mean, I will be happy to tell you where to go if you want to see cars. Cool cars, but I'm certainly hoping that in 2021 we will have at least some events despite the pandemic. But definitely do go to Scotland and do try to read about Jim Clark if you can. There are many cool resources and books about him, so please do check it out.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, and as usual, we are on all media you can imagine. Thanks to Patrick. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, despite, again, the fact that we are discussing the kind of a, very, very sort of tragic end of this fantastic career. But nevertheless, it was a great career and it was a great person despite the fact that he died very early.
Yeah.
So with that, we just want to say goodbye, and we hope that you will join us for the next episode, the rest of the series. In fact, please check out other videos that we mentioned and other podcasts if you are listening to us on the podcast rather than watching us on YouTube. But generally, I mean, I would recommend that you check out the YouTube, because we also show you some pictures. So hopefully, you could, if you listen to us on the podcast, also check out the videos. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. See you.